Okay, imagine this for a second. A court case, right? But the crucial evidence, maybe the most crucial, like how someone actually died, it's been intentionally hidden, destroyed. How does a court even deal with that? Especially when deciding if someone already convicted should get, another shot at appealing. We've had requests from you to explore cases just like this, where evidence tampering is central. And this case, SV Goliath from South Africa. It's a really powerful example. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into SV Goliath. And this isn't just about the crime itself or even the conviction. It's about something really specific, a key part of the legal machine, an application for leave to appeal.
Right. Think of it like asking a higher court, hey, can I even start my appeal? You basically have to convince them first that there's a decent chance, a real prospect, that the original verdict could be wrong.
Exactly. So as we dig into this fascinating case, you and I are going to get a real sense of the legal grounds for appeal. See how judges meticulously sift through evidence and understand just how important circumstantial evidence can become, especially when direct proof is, well, missing because someone made it disappear.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here, what this specific document gives us, is a window. We're looking at a judgment from the High Court of South Africa. It was delivered December 15th, 1998. Justice Cleaver presiding. And it shows us exactly how that court reviewed the original convictions against the applicant, Vincent James Goliath, how they decided if his appeal could even go forward. So for anyone interested in how legal systems actually work day to day, maybe you're just curious about justice, or maybe you're a law student looking at how precedent works, this case gives a remarkably clear view. You see the kind of details judges grapple with, especially when, like you said, they're facing deliberate obstruction.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Vincent James Goliath, the applicant, he's been found guilty on several counts. Specifically, assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm that was on someone named Barbara Stone. Then common assault on Delia Jacobs, who, tragically, was the deceased in the case. And then the big one, the murder of Delia Jacobs.
Precisely. And Mr. Lange, who was Goliath's lawyer for this appeal application, he'd also represented him at the trial. He brought up several points, several grounds for appeal, but these weren't really new arguments. They'd all been debated quite thoroughly during the trial itself, and the judge addressed them in the initial judgment. So in this application, Mr. Lange was essentially reiterating some points, making it clear he was still relying on all those original arguments he'd made before.
Right. So let's start with the first charge. He challenged the assault on Barbara Stone. Lange apparently highlighted some differences between the statement she gave police initially and what she said in court. And he also pointed out discrepancies between her testimony and another witness, Fran Stone. So the argument was essentially maybe another court looking at these inconsistencies might see it differently. How does a court typically handle that sort of thing? Minor contradictions versus the main story?
That's a fundamental question in trial assessment. And here, the court, Justice Cleaver, was quite firm. He basically said there was, and I quote, no prospect of another court coming to a different view on this charge. The reasoning was pretty direct. Despite any, let's call them minor contradictions, Barbara Stone's core evidence was seen as exceptionally strong. It was backed up by the report she made to the police right after it happened, her physical state at the time, and corroboration from Fran Stone's testimony.
So multiple layers of support.
Exactly. The court found it so compelling, they just didn't believe any other court would realistically overturn that specific conviction. It was solid.
Okay, so the assault on Barbara Stone, that appeal ground seems firmly shut down.
Right.
Now we get to the really critical part of Goliath's appeal, the murder charge. Delia Jacobs. This is where the legal complexities really surface. Mr. Lange, as you'd expect, he zeroed in on the court's findings based on circumstantial evidence. Now, for anyone listening, that means evidence that isn't direct proof, like a confession or a clear eyewitness. It relies on inference, connecting the dots. So his argument was that because the evidence was only circumstantial, and because the state couldn't even prove how Delia Jacobs died, those two things together meant another court might reasonably doubt the conviction.
And that really brings up the core challenge, doesn't it? How did the state secure a murder conviction if they couldn't pin down the cause of death? Well, the state, represented by Ms. Lochner in this appeal hearing, pointed back to key facts established at the trial. The deceased's body was identified by her mother using physical characteristics, and crucially, the judgment notes it was, quote, quite clear from the evidence that the body had been set alight with the view, or certainly to have the result of obliterating any cause of death.
So the act of destroying the evidence becomes central.
Precisely. That intentional destruction, that's a massive challenge for any justice system, but it also tells its own story.
And that detail, the deliberate burning to hide the cause of death, that really frames how the court had to approach this, doesn't it? Even without knowing the exact cause, the doctor who testified at the trial, they were able to satisfy the court that she didn't die naturally.
Yes, that was a critical finding.
And the judge handling this appeal, Justice Cleaver, he wasn't convinced that another court would disagree on that fundamental point. The death wasn't natural.
Right. And this is where you see the real power sometimes of circumstantial evidence, especially when someone tries to cover their tracks. Justice Cleaver explicitly stated that the circumstantial evidence they did have was, in his words, so strong that another court just wouldn't overturn the finding about who was responsible for Delia Jacobs' death. So despite the huge problem caused by trying to destroy the evidence, the sort of web of circumstances around it all pointed very, very strongly towards Goliath's guilt.
It's almost like the attempt to hide the truth backfired.
In a way, yes, it can become a damning piece of evidence in itself. It shows consciousness of guilt and attempt to prevent justice. It's a fascinating example of how courts adapt.
So wrapping this up then, what does it all mean? Basically, the application for leave to appeal in SV Goliath was dismissed. Flat out.
Correct.
The judge looked at everything again and found the original evidence, even with a lot of it being circumstantial, was just too overwhelming. There wasn't, in his view, a reasonable prospect that another court would come to a different conclusion on any of the charges, especially not the murder.
And if we zoom out, connect this to the bigger picture of law. This case really hammers home a fundamental principle, doesn't it? It highlights the incredible strength that corroborating evidence can have, and how powerful circumstantial evidence can be, particularly when direct proof, like the specific cause of death, has been made impossible to find, often, by the perpetrator trying to cover things up.
Yeah.
This case kind of shows that the lack of direct proof, paradoxically, can sometimes strengthen a conviction if that lack is clearly down to someone deliberately destroying the evidence. Which leaves us with a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. Consider that profound challenge we talked about when a perpetrator actively tries to destroy the evidence of their crime. How does the court's reliance on circumstantial evidence in situations like that actually uphold justice? And what does it tell us about how flexible, how adaptable legal reasoning has to be when faced with those kinds of calculated acts?